All right. Okay, so today we do have other breakout rooms happening at the same time. We have the first room could be Tom Knudsen, talk about 3D model, homeobox, gene activation, to recapitulation. Shane Hudson on breakout room 2, computational models of secondary palette fusion disruption, and us here on the third. So I welcome you to the third panel. Okay. And if you were on the fence between my breakout room and Tom Knudsen's breakout room, I would suggest to actually switch to Tom Knudsen's breakout room because his lecture will not be recorded, so you cannot watch it again later. So if you're in between me and Tom Knudsen, I suggest to go to Tom Knudsen's talk because it's being that one will not be recorded. Okay. But of course, you're most of welcome to stay here. Okay, so the plan of action today is to talk about anchors and stress strain. When I talk about stress strain, it's just a way to measure stress strain. It's just basically make a model of solids. In all of them, we'll be using links. So this will can be thought as an extension of how to use links and what links can do on CompuCell. And the one thing that we did not talk about links is that we have not talked about the fact that you cannot only make links between cells, but you can also make links between center of mass of cells and a specific point in space. Okay, so we're going to talk about anchors. Okay, so that's how we call those type of links. And then we're going to do 2 exercises: anchors versus external potential, and use anchors as a way to make some migration. Okay, so that's the plan. And then we switch to stress strain. We do have to stop at 4:30, so there's not much time. So let me just go ahead and talk about focal point plasticity links in CompuCell. So this is a slide that you have already seen before, okay, how links work, and hopefully you're already familiar how they actually work, okay. Of course, when you use those links, it's usually you connect directly the center of mass of one cell to the center of mass of the second cell, whatever that cell may be. Those cells may be part of the same cluster or different clusters. So if within that same cluster, it can be, you can actually use the links to connect the cells to make links between different compartments of the cell. Okay, so if you're basically modeling a epithelial tissue and you have the apical, basal, and central compartments, you can add links between them, and then you can manipulate the length of those links to make your epithelial cells to be more elongated or more shortened. So that's a way to control the length of the cells using this. But you are not CompuCell restricted to only use links between the center of mass of cells or the center of mass of objects. You can also make links to use those same process to actually model anchors, where you connect the center of mass of one cell to that specific point in space in your lattice site. Okay, so the formula is exactly the same. Okay, impulse is basically a Hookean-like spring. Okay, so but instead of having the distance between 2 centers of mass is the distance between a center of mass of cell and a point space specified by this coordinate here, right? This vector coordinate. But everything is exactly the same. You have the actual distance between the cell and this point, and the target distance that you should have between this cell and the point, right? And you have a weight factor in front of it to tell how strong that anchor would be. But it's basically the same. And when you want to use this one, in the wizard, you still have to go through the same things. You just have to select all the things that you would normally select, and you have to select focal point plasticity, okay? By default, the wizard will place all the possible pairs of links between cells of different types and some between many types. If you want to use anchors, you can just delete all of them and ignore, and you uncheck the local tag in your code, and then you'll be actually able to use the anchors in your code. So that is where I actually stop presentation. And my suggestion now is for us to do a code along exercise here. And you can either do the code along, or you can directly load the file in the student material folder. So in the student material folder, if you go there right now, there should be a model 8.3 Belmonte session, which is the third session, and there you see the 3 files that we'll be using in this exercise. So for this exercise, please check the file which is called anchors versus external potential. That will be the one that we'll be using right now. So as I said, you can either do this, or we can do a code along exercise here. So I'll do, let me just close everything here. I want to make sure that I have this part. Okay. Actually, instead of doing a code along, let's just open the file, and I want to show you how it works. Sure, which model? It should be 8.3. So let me just. So if you go here, student material folder, the demo code, okay, you should have those modules, and there should be a module 8.3 Belmonte session, okay. So you click here, you should see 3 zip files, and now 8.3. And then it should be, oh, I misspelled. Should be anchor versus external force, okay? So if you open that, you should see a first, well, XML file, right? And you can read this XML file, and you can already tell what's going on. Let's make this a little bit bigger, okay? So on the XML file, you see that you have dimensional simulation to be 100 times 60, okay? Temperature 10 is periodic on the X, okay? And then I have just one cell type, cell of type A. I have the volume of the cell. I add an external potential there, center of mass. I have the contact energy, and I have the focal point plasticity, okay? So here in the focal point plasticity, you see that I have deleted all the internal parameters and the external parameters, because I'm not interested in making links between cells. I'm only interested in making links between the cell and a point in the substrate, okay? Is this able to send a link to the examples via chat? Let me try, okay? Okay, okay. This is the link to the folder. So then you have access to all the 3 files. So let me know if this is working. Work for me. So was everybody able to find the folder, download the code, and open it with it? Say in the chat or make a thumbs up in the. Works. Daisy, thank you. Kirin, got it. Do not know how to pronounce your name, sir. Dr. Postek. I think it worked for you too. Okay. Guzamai works. Okay. I'm assuming that's work for everyone. So you're seeing the code, and you should see a code just like this. Okay. You notice that on the neighbor order, I just set it to 0 to make sure that no links will work. And you see here that in my uniform initializer, I'm not filling my space with cells. I'm just set my box just enough so I could have fit only 2 cells in my simulation. Okay, so this is how my simulation initial condition looks like. I have 2 cells. Okay, and if I update simulation a little bit, you see that the cells are there and they're happy, and apparently nothing is working, going on with them. Okay, but that is the XML level. Let's now look at what's happening on the steppables. Okay, so go to the Python level. You see that you have now this code here, right? So let's take a look at it. So what you can see that I have defined 4 external variables, right? And a lambda target distance and a maximum distance. Okay, so these external variables will be used when I create the anchors. Okay, and what I do here in the start function, I go over all the cells in my list. So I've been going over those 2 cells. Okay, and what I'm doing is I'm extracting the center of mass of those cells. Okay, X, Y, Z, and storing them as a variable. Okay, and notice that I'm not, when you retrieve the center of mass of the cell, you are retrieving a floating point number, a real number. Okay, it can be 23.4, and the Y can be 57.8. Okay, but for the anchors, okay, you need the reference point to be a integer, because you're linking your center of mass of your cell to a lattice site in your grid. So this X, Y, Z, all those coordinates, they have to be made into integers, right? And then what I'm doing here on line 19 is what you actually use to create anchor in your CompuCell simulation. So you see that have anchor equals self.new FPP anchor. Okay, and then you give the comments just like you used to do for the normal FPP links between cells, but is a little bit different, because the first thing you specify is the cell, which cell you're linking, what will be the strength of the constraint, what should be the target distance, what should be the maximum distance before the link breaks or the anchor breaks, and then you specify the coordinates X, Y, Z of your reference point at which you are linking to. Okay, and again, those X, Y, Z, they have to be integers for it to work. Okay, and you notice that I specify that. So what's happening is that I'm basically setting my reference point to be exactly at the center of mass of the cell. So it's really working like as an anchor, because your cell is here and the anchor is going to be right beneath the cell. Okay, so the cell can still move around, but you'll not be able to move far away from the anchor. Okay, it is really anchored at the position at which it starts with. Okay, so and then I break. Having this break here means that I'm gonna anchor the first cell on my list, but I will not anchor the remaining cells on the list. Okay, so one of those 2 cells will be anchored, and the other one will not be anchored. Okay, maybe I can use a lighter color for the cells. Okay, pick up from here. Okay, so one of the cells will be anchored, the other will not. How can you tell if they are anchored or not? Is because after that, on the step function, at Monte Carlo step 1000, okay, I'm going over all the cells in my list, and I'm adding the external force on the cells to make them move, okay? So the two cells will be being forced to move to the left because I make the external force to be positive, okay? And one of the, so will both of them move or not? So one of them will move, the other not, the other will not move, okay? So if you go to your code and you play the simulation, let me play here, you see that they're happy, then 1,000, now you have the external force, and you see that one is moving because it's not anchored, and the other here is anchored, so it cannot move. Okay, so both of them are feeling a force, but only then, but this one is anchored to that specific point space, so it cannot move. So let me know if this works for you guys, and what you can do. You can make the lambda equals 1, and make it maybe make the standard force a little bit higher to 50. And when you do this, save simulation and play it again, what you should see that this cell is going to move faster. And now because my anchor is much weaker, you see that the cell is going to move towards the left, but you stop. So let me stop here. Let's, oops, if this happens, okay, opening player. Yeah, it's playing, and now I'm gonna, so the cell was here. Okay, so this is a much stronger force, and you can see that this one was stretched and stopped, and that's basically when the restoring force of the cell equals to the external force that I added. So can you visualize the anchor? Kirin, I would love to, because this will be really important for this and the next exercise, but you have here visualization, app links, okay, I turn off, turn on again, and for some bug in the code, you're not visualizing the links for when you use anchors. So that is very unfortunate, especially for me that's teaching this module, but it's not. So you have to wait for the new update of CompuCell to actually visualize the anchors. Okay, so let me make the lambda again. Okay, so stop here, make simulation. So here what's the cell? So now that my lambda is stronger, okay, the cell gets stretched all the way here, but then stops. Okay, so if you're not seeing the anchor link in your simulation, is because it's just, well, unfortunately, it's not there. Okay. What I can also do, which will be fun, is I can do every 1,000 Monte Carlo steps. I can switch the direction of the force. Okay, so what I can do, so if I do this, every 1,000 Monte Carlo steps, the cell will see a force, but the force will change direction. Okay, so you see the up cell moving this here and this, and moving to left and the right, and the cell that's anchored will gonna be stretched to the left and then stretched to the right. Okay, so let's try to do this. So let me make the lambda, the cell force to be, well, maybe a little bit weaker. Okay, let me place here, and then let's try to do the simulation. Okay, so at 1,000 should see a, okay. I guess the force is too weak. Let me try it again. Oh, yes. Okay, there was a typo in my code here. Okay, so all right, now it's working. Okay. So what I'm doing here, uh, every 1,000 Monte Carlo steps, I'm switching the direction of the force. Okay, so sometimes the force to the right, sometimes the force to the left. I just want to see you guys the cell kind of moving back and forth. Okay, maybe I can do this like 10, and maybe I can do this every 500 Monte Carlo step. Okay, so this just to show that the link is there and is working. Okay, so 1,000, you see a force to the right, and then I switch the force direction. So I'm switching the force to be the right and then the left. So what's happening here? Monte Carlo step divided by 500 equals 0. So this division with the use the percentile sign, okay, is not returning the result of division, is returning the what is left out of the division. So if you do like a 1 divided by 100, it returns 1. If you do 20 divided by 100, it returns 20. If you do 500 divided by 500, it returns 0. If you do 550 divided by 100, it returns 50. If you do 1,000 divided by 500, it returns 0. Yes, the remainder of module, yes. Thank you. It's just that the specific English term was missing from me. Okay, so it returns a remainder, and then the remainder will be 0 every time we have multiples of 500. Does it make sense? Okay. So the anchor should be sitting more or less here, right? That's, you see that the cell being stretched here but resists, being stretched here but resists. So this is a way to use anchors just to hold the cells into place. Okay, but so let's say you have cells that interact with the CM below, okay, and they have very tight adhesion junctions with the CM, so we really like to stay there. Okay, so you can model that strong attachment with anchors. And then let's say there's a lot of other cells that are kind of pushing it aside, but because it's kind of anchored to the CM below it, you can push it a little bit, but at some if you push it too much, you'll be requiring to kind of disrupt the adhesion points on it. Okay, so then you will not work. One thing you can do is that, okay, in this example, the anchors will stay there forever because you have to stretch by 1,000 light size before it breaks. So what you can do, you can maybe start with a small force like 5, okay, and let's make my stretching to be 10 lattice sites, okay. And what you'll be doing here now in this simulation is that at 1,000 Monte Carlo steps, we add external force that's very weak. And then every 500, after that, I double this force. Okay. And then as I double, you see the cell that's not anchored to move faster and faster and faster. And the cell below that's anchored should be being stretched, and then stretch a little bit more, then be stretched a little more. Eventually, it will be stretched so much that it will break the anchor, and then you should see it moving just like the other one. Okay. So let's try to do this, right? Maybe I should start with external force of 1 to make this very slow. So let's try the simulation. Stop here. Stop. Okay, let's play. So the first 1,000 Monte Carlo steps, nothing happens. Okay. You see that this one wanders around, but this is not. Okay, at 1,000, you have a force moving a little bit. Okay, Then, okay, I double the force. I already broke the cell. Okay, and now they're both moving at the same speed. Okay, let me try to make this a little, let me just increase the lambda, okay, and maybe increase the distance to 30 so you can see the effects more easily. Now, let me just try it again. Okay, okay, nothing happens. The cell is here, where my mouse is. I add the force, it means stretched. Force, double, 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 double. Oh, and it broke the anchor. Okay. Of course, if the attachment is same, but the break distance should be something similar to the size of the cell. But here the idea is just to give a taste of how the anchors work. Okay. So I'll stop simulation here. This is making sense. I like when you guys give me feedback. So does it make sense? Do you guys have any question or comments? Because I have one more example I'd like to give, but I'd like to first hear from you. How does anchor gets broken? It gets broken because you have this maximum distance parameter, right? So the maximum distance tells you how far your two reference points have to be from one another before the link broke. So that happens both for the cell-cell link and for the anchor link, okay? So I'm increase the force on the cell, and the cell, the anchor is here, right? And then the cell gets stretched. So let me play this again. So this anchor is right here where my mouse is. I add a force. And then when I add the force, the cell dislocates a little bit, but it's about one lattice side, so it will not broke. I increase the force, now it's about 7 lattice sides, now it's about 10, now it's about 20. And as soon as it's about 30 lattice sides or bigger, the link breaks, because that is when you set the maximum distance would be. Okay, got it? Okay. So that's something that we didn't really talk about when you talk about links, how the links gets broken, right? So this how the links gets broken is when the distance between those two reference points gets bigger than a cut-off distance. All right. Any more questions? Well, I guess so. The problem is that I'm not really familiar with the biology of what you just mentioned. But maybe the cells they want to move and they are anchored at some point, or there's some external force act on the cell, or the cells have a really strong attachment to another cell or to another object in the medium, and then it eventually breaks and start wandering around. Yeah, that then if I'm interpreting correctly, then yeah, that would be a way to do it. That's is looking more like something that we did on module 7.3 yesterday, when you have the movement of cells through other cells using links. Okay, so I think that's something that looks a little bit more like what you described right now. But anyway, oh, we cannot join. Okay, so, but very quickly, well, let me just open here and give you a teaser. Okay. So the teaser is this, right? We are talking about cell crawling, right? And then and you talk about when the cells crawl, they not only crawl on the substrate, many times the cell crawls between tissues. So this field of view is full of cells, but you're only seeing the neutrophils and macrophages, and they crawl by pulling on the other cells. And the idea was to make a model where the cells polarize, and you use the links to actually have the cells to grab another cell and pull it. So the idea was to make a model that would look like this. We have a crawling cell that use the other cells as they track to move, and that's how the cells move when within deep tissues. So that was the exercise we did on module 7.3. Okay, then we went through the code, and then we make a base model that will look something that's similar to this. Okay. All right. So you can go back pretty much the same. Okay, maybe that's what you want to do. Okay. All right. So actually, while I here, I had planned for that session to have a exercise of how to make this same migration idea, but instead of using the cells making links with the cells in front of it, the cell will make a links with the substrate in front of it. So now the idea is to kind of use the anchor as a propelling tool, where you not only use the anchor to attach your cell where it is, but you kind of throwing the anchor in front of you and then pulling it. So that will be how the cell will be moving, right? And more or less, that's how the cells move on substrate. They have the nabiliporia that extends, right? Makes attachment to the substrate and then propel themselves forward by kind of retracting its here. So that what we're going to be doing now is something that looks more like this, okay? The cell extend protrusion, attach lesion site, okay, and pull itself. Okay, I've got the numbers here. To yes, and then move itself forward. Okay, so in this case, and you see that not only happens in vitro in the experiments, but you also sometimes see that in vivo, where the cells are actually moving over a track, and then because they're doing like this, they're actually moving like what you see here in this schematic. Okay, so that can be done with links. We have done in the past using I don't have the picture here of a model with a lamellipore in front of it and propelling itself forward, okay? But you can also make the same model of the cell moving on substrate using anchors and links for the cells. So basically, I'm showing how to make this model the same process, but use a different technique, okay? So for this second exercise, I'll ask you to go here to our demo code and using the anchor cell crawling file, okay, download it, open your computer and take a look at what the code does. When you're inspecting consultant with code, I always look at the XML first to see what are the elements and the process or the plugins that are turned on, and then look at the steppable to see if there's any other very specific thing happening on this Python steppable level. Okay, so just a quick note that when you open and the zip file, that code still is named as module 6.3. Okay, so it still have the previous name. So because the plan was to do for module 6.3, but I did not have time. So that's how the code looks like. So let me just close this one. Okay. Let me expand this. So please go there, open XML and take a look at what the model is doing. So let me know when you all got the code and I'll have open intuited. Okay. Also, let me know if anything about this model that you are doing before did it work on a computer? Did it not work on a computer? If did you have any issues, just please let me know. It worked for me. Okay, good. You have the crawler running as well. Excellent. Okay, so let's take a look at the crawler. So does anyone need a little bit more time to download the file? Or is everybody good? Yes, we are in 6.3. Yeah. Okay, the name is a little bit unfortunate, but yes, we are on the 6 on the 3-cell crawling model. Okay. Okay, so if you open here, and I will start with XML. Okay, so you see that, okay, you have a simulation of 300 by 100. You have only one cell type, the crawler cell. It has a volume. You're tracking the center of mass. Okay, the contact energies are pretty much standard, everything 10. You have the focal point plasticity call-in, the local tag turn on, and nothing else, okay? And you have the differentializer where we just add one cell, which will be the crawler cell in our simulation, okay? So you just have this, okay? So that should make a cell that does nothing. But when you look at the steppables, okay, in the steppables, you have here a lot of code now, okay? You have, well, because you're creating anchors, we do have the lambda target distance and maximum distance as global variables, okay? But you also have those angle, delta angle, and range, okay? So now we are having these 3 extra parameters here to control, which are actually going to let you control where your anchor will be drawn, okay? So let's go, well, let's maybe just try to play the simulation on the player and see how it looks like. Opening player. Okay, let me just pause here, and I have to find my window. Here's my window. Okay, so I have here's my color cell in orange. Okay, it's not doing anything. It is moving. Okay, so you see that it's moved to the right. So for this example, it would be really good if you could see the anchors, right? But we don't. That's very unfortunate. We will fix that CompuCell bug. Okay, so it's moving here. Oh, and then there is a unfortunate thing going on here is that the cell doesn't know what to do when it encounters the boundary. Okay, we can fix that later, right? But for now, does anyone has a code and a oops, went back to the previous simulation. Open here again. All right. So does everybody get a simulation that he has a cell that's sitting there and then start moving? Yeah. So you see that a cell the cell is moving towards the right and is using anchors to do this. Okay. So let me now go back to the code and let you walk through it. Okay. So we have look at what's on the XML. Okay. We have only one cell with one constraint and the focal point process plugin turned on. And stepable files, you see that here we are stepping, if your Monte Carlo steps are higher than 1,000, I'm going over all the cells in my simulation, which in this case is just one cell, right? And here I creating an anchor, right, of that cell with this strength, this target distance, this maximum distance, okay? And the anchor will be between that cell and this point space XYZ. Okay. So where I'm choosing XYZ, let's look here. X, Y, and Z will be a point that is at the center of mass of the cell, plus it's not really at the center of mass, it's the center of mass, but it's located to the right by a specific amount, and also has some kind of deviation on the Y direction. Okay. So how we are choosing this deviation? Okay. So first I'm setting up an angle. The angle will be 0. Okay. And not only drawing my anchor in front of the cell, I'm drawing the anchor in front of the cell plus or minus 30 degrees. Okay. So I'm and basically, so let me just show the picture that I had before. What I'm doing, I'm basically doing this, okay? I'm selecting I have this angle 0 that sets the direction which the cell will move. And I also selecting a maximum range of my angle. So I give it a little bit of a spread, okay, in the angle. So basically I'm choosing an angle that's between my direction plus or minus 30 degrees. So this is what's going here. So the direction is going to be to the right, angle 0. So assume that angle starts from 0, then 190 degrees, 108 degrees, 270, 360, okay? So it's a 0 degrees plus or minus 30 degrees. Does this make sense? And then, so I select this angle between there. So then I'm gonna say where I'm gonna throw my angle in this direction or that direction. And after I select my angle, I select the range. And so after I select the geometry, I select how far I'm gonna throw my angle or how far I'm gonna extend the protrusion. And that's going to be some number between 2 lattice sites away from my center of mass up to 7 lattice sites away from my center of mass. So I pick up a random number between 2 and range, and where this range is 7. Okay. So I choose I basically choose an angle, a direction, and then I choose a range, how far I'm going to throw it. Okay. So A and R means that. And then after I choose an angle and a direction and a distance that I'm going to throw my anchor, I have to translate that into lattice site coordinates. Okay. And then I just grab as a reference point the center of mass of the cell plus R cosine of the angle, R times sine of the angle. So I get the X and Y coordinates, and then I use that to tell where my anchor will be. And then I create the anchor, right? And the cell will have the anchor in front of it, maybe will be a slight angle. And then the cell, because the target distance between the center of mass and where the anchor reference point is should be 0, the cell will propel itself towards that point, okay? But of course, this cannot be done only once. It has to be done multiple times because you have to create your anchor, pull yourself forward, and then you have to remove the anchor and make a new one. Otherwise, the cell will not move. So that's why here on line 30 and 31, you have those two parts here. Sorry, 29 is that, well, 31 first. On line 31, you see that before I create my angle, my new anchor, I remove all the anchor that I had before. So I just use self.remove all cell FTP links, and then the cell means that I'm going to remove all the links of the cell, including the links that are acting as anchors. Okay, so I clear up all the anchors, and now I'm free to make a new one to substitute for that. And I do this every 100 Monte Carlo steps. Okay, so if I increase the frequency, you can see the effect of that choice in the simulation. Okay, so let me play it again. Oh, again, went back to the previous one. Play simulation. Okay, so okay, it creates an anchor and move forward. Then the next 1,000 Monte Carlo cell is going to create a new anchor and move itself forward. Okay, so you see that okay. Because I only create my anchors every 1,000 Monte Carlo step, the movement cell is much slower, right? And then you can play with this to see what the effects would be. Okay, for example, I can instead of have a minimum range of 2, you can have a minimum range of let's say 7 to 14. Okay, so you in this case you always propel itself forward. Okay, so let me stop. Why is doing that? Just open here. Here. You see that it makes a step every 1,000 Monte Carlo steps. Create angle, pull itself forward. 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 And then you see that because you lost some kind of angle to be between 30 plus and minus 30 degrees to the right, you can make your cell, the cell will not move in a straight line. It can move a little bit up, a little bit down. Okay. So you can now play with this, the orientation of the cell is going, and also with the degree of angle that you allow the cell to do, and then you can have, you can see the effects that they have on the cell movement. So is all this making sense? Are you guys following? Please let me know. Yes, okay. So try to let me know what happened if you make this delta angle to be like 5 make simulation with the delta angle to be 5 and make another simulation with the delta angle is 180. What do you expect in both cases? Okay. Maybe a bit slower. Which one? Okay, so let's do the, okay, let's make our delta angle to be 5. Okay. If I make this 5, what to expect will be the effect on the simulation? Yeah, this is the angle of dispersion. So basically, we are, before it was 30 plus or minus 30, now going to be plus or minus 5. Okay. So this is correct. Maybe you move in a straight line. Yes. Okay. So try to do that in the model. Okay. I'll stop here, play again. Let's play. So actually, I'm gonna reduce this a little bit more. So the movement will be a bit more continuous. Okay. So this is have 5. Move, 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 move. Yeah. Pretty much in a straight line, right? Because you have a lot, very little some movement. Okay. Now let's make this delta angle to be, no, let's keep at 5. And now let's make this delta angle to be 45. Okay. How do you expect the movement to be? So if I play this simulation now, okay, is that what you got? That's, yeah. So let's play. Player. Yeah, in a straight line. Okay. So this weird effect that the cell kind of bumps back, is because you have to make proper adjustments to the periodic bound conditions. Okay. Plus, let's make in the x direction again, but now instead of having 50, let's make it 90 degrees. So if I make this 90, up, open the player again. All right. So, okay, 90 degrees plus or minus. What do you expect will happen? So now the angle is very high, can be anything between plus 90 degrees, minus 90 degrees. Yeah, it will be more wildly. So let's look at it. Okay, sometimes here, sometimes no, now. On the net, you're gonna still move to the right, but the movement will be more, it's more like a zigzag, right? And of course, at the limit where you make this 180, well, then you can move of any direction. right? And then you basically have a run walk. Okay. So here you can move any place. So here you basically model an active run walker, right? It's just a run walker where the step size could be can be anything. Okay. So you can see that you have a very simple model, and that's how it works. Okay. And of course, it gives some kind of freedom of to choose the parameters. So you can choose the frequency at which you make those links. You can choose the how long you throw your angle by the range. You can also how wide you throw your angle in terms of you throw anchor in terms of angle, but you can maybe it's up to you to decide if this thing here is that a good or bad model for your crawling cell. Okay, so it's up to you to decide that. Okay, so okay, so is this make sense? So in this simulation, we have no periodic boundary conditions. We can add that if you go here and write boundary with capital B underscore X, right? Periodic slash. You can now code along with me like this. Okay, and then make the same thing for the Y. I think if you only do this, will not fix the issue because, yeah, let's see. So let me just do this. So in principle, the solution is have periodic boundary conditions. Stop and stop. Okay, so to really check if this is working, let me go back to plus or minus 30 degrees. Save. So what I did here, I make this back to 30 degrees. And here I add I tell CompuCell to have periodic boundary conditions. Okay. You don't have jump. Okay, so that would solve the issue. So let me open in player. But what may happen is that the cell just gets stuck at the end of the boundary. Because when you get here, I just now it's working. Okay. Okay, that works. Okay, so I should have used those two tags here in the reference code. Well, probably CompuCell already understand that if you make it an anchor to a point that, okay, where's my mouse? That is that's here, you automatically adjust to make the anchor. Now, if automatically adjust to make it here, I think automatically adjust to be here and then takes care to say, okay, you have to move over the small distance, not the big distance. So, well, CompuCell is doing a good job of not dealing with the periodic boundary conditions here. Okay, so I'm glad that's the case here. So, more questions about this model? So there's something that I'd like to try here, which is, let's suppose that you do not have an open field like this, but you have many other cells in the simulation randomly placed, okay? And this anchor, you can make an anchor to a place in the simulation that's free, but not in a place of simulation that's already occupied by other cells, okay? So suppose you have a situation that looks like this. So let's try to model this along. So this is going to be really a model along because I have not tried that. So what I want to do now, I want to let's see if this works. Let's make a new cell type on the XML. And let's call it cell type ID 2 and call let's call it cell type, the name cell type will be B. And then if you add a new cell type, we have to go here and add also a volume for this new cell type. So the idea here is to add a bunch of cells in the simulation where the anchor, the crawler have to go around, okay? And it's not allowed to make an anchor on a lattice site, which is already occupied by a cell, okay? So let me do this here. And here, then copy all those energies, okay? And let's make medium. Oh, well, this is going to be B with medium, B with crawler, and B with B, okay? And I want my crawler cell to not stuck with the B cells. So I'm going to make this energy to be high, be 20, so they are non-sticky. Okay. So are you following me what I'm doing here? I'm basically adding a new cell type to my simulation. Okay. So it's yes or no. So I add a new cell type B. I specify its volume. No problem. Okay. And then I have to expand the contact energies to include the fact that I have cell B now. Because if I don't do that, you assume that the energies are zero, and zero is going to be very sticky, okay? And the only thing that I did here is that I want my energy of B cells with crawler cells to be 20, because I don't want, if they come to contact, I want to move apart, okay? And now here in the infra initializer, what I want to do, let me do the following. Let me make a new region, okay? And let me make this from 0 to what simulation? 300 and 100. So 0 to 300, 0 to 100, okay? And I'll add cells of type B here, with 7. So if I just do this, actually, it's better if I draw this region before I place my crawler cell. Okay, so let me just switch the order. So if I do here, I basically filling up the whole space with B cells. Okay, but I don't want to do that. I want to have the spread, so I can force and to be separated in space by adding a gap between the cells. Have we ever used this gap tag here in the infra initializer? If you haven't, now I'm gonna use it and you're gonna learn what it does. So let's make the gap here to be 14. So this means that within that box, you place your cell, and then your next cell is gonna be 14 pixels away from the initial cell. So you have a gap between them. So if I do this and save, let me go back here. That's what I get. Do you see? So if I make my gap, so please mind the gap here to be 28, and I stop simulation again. Now I create my B cells more spread. You see, if I make my gap to be 0, I go back here, stop simulation, play again. Now all the cells have 0 space between them. If I make it 1, they only have 1 lattice side of space between them, but I want to be more sparsely spaced, so I'll make this let's say 20. So if you make it 20, stop here. When I draw my cells, I still draw in between 0 to 100 on the Y and 0 to 300 on the X. but I'm giving a space of 20 lattice size between each cell, each B cell. Unfortunately, 20, the cells I can touch here, so let me give a little bit more space. Okay, that sounds good. So, is this making sense? Okay. Yes. So now let's just play simulation, right? In a play simulation, the cell is still, oh, okay. So what's going on here? What did I forgot to do? That's not what I wanted. Yes, I'm making all my cells to move with links, right? Yeah, I want to do the links only for the specific type. So how can you fix that simulation? So good, let's go back to the here. When I do this, I do for all the cells in my simulation, I want to do only for the crawler cells. So I have to fix that, right? By type, open, close, self dot crawler. Only the crawler cell will move. You guys have to stay put, okay? So I just have to make sure that I only add the anchors to the cells of type crawler. Okay. So let's do this. So if you do this, okay, let me save simulation. Go back here. Play. Let me play again. Okay. Now it's doing something more like I want. The cell is moving, okay, and it has no trouble making the links. If you found something in front of it, it just pushes because it still makes the links beneath the cells of different types, okay? But now what I want to do, so before I move forward, did all of you got some that looks more or less like this? I want to change the color here to be maybe like this, a lighter color to increase contrast. Okay, that's better. If yours is a little garbage collector, is because you probably have a low, no, it's not the first strong, well, maybe, but I think that the most likely issue is that on the contact energies, you have very high contact energy, low contact energy between type B and crawler. Make it to 20 and it should not be a garbage collector. So I think that might be the issue. Okay, let me try that again with that parameters. Stop, play. Yeah, if it has a very low contact energy, what will happen is that as soon as you hit one, you drag along, which is a very nice simulation as well. It actually looks a little bit like the lateral line movement that you have seen in the slides. And you can see that as you grab more cells, it's getting, it slows down, okay? Because when the cell moves it a pixel forward, you have to have all the cells behind to move a pixel forward as well. So I guess that eventually that cell will break from the cell that behind. It breaks. Yes. It breaks. Grab the news one. I'm here. And eventually going to hit that big blob there. And and you'll be able to go through. So that is the thing that you want to avoid. If the cells you make by the protrusions, right, and this is a 2D view, okay, and there is a cell in front of it, you should not be able to make a protrusion underneath the cell, okay, or at least you can prevent that from happening. So what you want to do now is prevent the cells from making protrusion if the lattice side where you're going to make the anchor is already occupied by another cell. Okay, the Magno is getting error. Step object has no attribute crawler. Okay, so it probably is here. Self service by tap. Make sure you have self dot in front of it. Okay, because then you should be able to retrieve the cell type crawler. Make sure you have the self dot in front of it. And make sure that everything here is typed as there is. Okay. Let's see if that fixes the issue. Working now. It was a name. Yes. Yes, it had to be uppercase. Okay, good. So what you want to do now? Now you want to make the case that you cannot make a anchor and a lattice point is already occupied by another cell. So the way you do this, you have to here, you have to add condition or add check if X, Y, Z is already occupied. So that's what you want to do. So how can you do this? Well, you already have the coordinates X, Y, Z is right for us. So what you want to do now, you want to inquire CompuCell, okay, are that coordinate X, Y, Z, is there a cell there or isn't? Okay, and you can do this by going here to CompuCell3D Python, and have this under cell manipulation, you have the option get cell at pixel. Yeah, we actually should be get cell at site. But you click this command here, and you should get cell equals self dot cell underscore field X, Y, and Z. Okay, so what you instead of have 10, 11, 10, let's place here X, Y, and Z, and then we have to check if the cell exists or if it's a medium cell. Okay. So is this making sense? So if you want to get this command again, you do that by going here, CompuCell3D Python, cell manipulation, get cell at pixel. Okay. So after you do this, now we have to do the if statement. So if not cell, so this is basically saying that, okay, if this is not occupied by a cell, then you draw your anchor, okay? And if it's cell, then there's already cell there, so you cannot make your protrusion and grab from it. In reality, many cells are able to actually crawl, make protrusions underneath other cells. So this is something that may happen in biology. Here I'm just showing how you can model the case where when the cells cannot. Maybe the other cell is strongly attached to the substrate, and then the other cell cannot really make a protrusion underneath it. Okay. So here we're retrieving an object on the XYZ coordinates, and if there is no object there, you can do the anchor. If there's an object there, you cannot do. Okay, and then you have to wait 100 Monte Carlos and try that again. Does it make sense? Yes, so let me save simulation and let me play it. Oh, crashed. No problem. Oops, we crash again. Ah, okay. So do you know why my simulation is crashing all the time? Is because here I'm doing loop over the cells, and here I'm retrieving an object and call it cell. Okay. And then if the cell does not exist, I make an anchor between this point and a cell, but cell is not an anchor. So probably I have a name problem here. I just reusing a variable. So let's call this cell 2 and this cell 2. Okay. And that should fix it. Okay. So I cannot give this object here that I'm retrieving from the position space to have the same name as the cell which I'm looping over. That should work. We still have the issue of the cell acting as a garbage collector. Okay. So let me go back here. Make this back to 20. And actually, let me do something a little bit more drastic. Let me make a region at x equals 200 to 207. Now, I'm gonna create a line of cells. Okay. So oops. Now, I'll have a problem because of this. Okay. So basically, I add this region here, so I have a line of cells here. Okay. And now let me play. And because it cannot make an anchor in a place where there is already a cell, you should not be able to go through here. You cannot, right? Unless it makes an anchor on the other side. Okay, then it can't. So let me make this a little bit wider. Okay. Because the range of my cell is 14 pixels, and the cell width is 7. You actually can make an anchor on the other side. So let me just prevent that from happening. Stop, play. So I have here a wall. My cell wants to move, go forward, and then you hit there, and then it cannot go forward. Okay, so the cell cannot make an anchor in a place where the other cell already exists. But if I let's say if I comment this out and allow the cell to make a link in a place where there is already a cell, then you actually will able to go through. Okay. There again. Now I'll try again, and now I don't have that condition that you can only make links in an empty space. You can make links anywhere, and then you see that the cell, well, it should be, well, you still see the resistance from the other tissues, but it will be able to go through. You see that's pushing, right? And eventually it will break and pass through it. Okay, so it already looks very different what came before, the cell was just not able to do it. Okay. So does this make sense? Are you following along? A very strong cell, yes. But if I'm commenting this now, and never forget about the indentation, and I play it again, the cell will get there, but the cell will not be able to go through. So, oh, sorry, you cannot pass. You see that it's very different from the other one because the other one was able to kind of push itself a little bit and strong, but this one, it just sits there, right? It cannot go through. All right. Does this make sense? You guys have any questions? The other thing you can do, you can allow the cell to make the links there below the space, but add anchors of each one of those blue cells to the right below them. So that will be really hard for the cell to squeeze through. Okay, so you can combine the anchors as a propelling a mod for cell propulsion, with the anchors for the blue cells as a way to, I'm fixed here at this point space because I have strong addition sites. So we can actually do both at the same time. Let's see. Both using the cell anchors methods in CompuCell. Okay, so is there any questions or comments? When you don't comment on the chat, I have no idea if it's how we're going. Nice demo. Okay. I also like this demo. I would say that this was my favorite so far. It's because it's new to me. I have to think about this this week. So any questions? I don't have much time. I just want to maybe quickly go through the stress strain model, show what's going on there, and then we resume back to the other room at 4:30. So we have 90 minutes to the next demo. So please, because time is short, let me just close this. Okay. So the last demo, what I want to talk about is actually about the title that have been sent out, stress strain. Okay, so when you talk about stress strain experiments, solids, we usually talk about how elastic material is. Okay, so usually have this kind of things here. You place an object here, concrete, a metal, or some other material that you're studying, and then you compress it. You either compress it or extend it, right? And you see how much resistance force the material has with compression or extension. So the stress is defined by the force that you add to the object divided by the contact area of the object. And the strain is defined as the initial length of the object, L0, or the difference in length that the object has with respect to this initial length. So that's the strain. And the reason you do stress strain graph instead of a force size of the object is that by doing this, you not only inquire by the external and geometrical parts of the object, but you actually are reducing everything into units that will reflect the characteristics of the material of your object and not necessarily the size or the geometry of your object. So that's why you'd use stress strain in this kind of measurements, okay? Because it reflects the molecular properties of the object in respect of the size of the object. If you make an object bigger, and if you press an object from the sides, and then you make the object and measure how its stiffness, and then you make the object bigger like this, and you measure the stiffness again, the stiffness will actually have be reduced to half of what it was before. Because the stiffness, when you treat the material as a hook and spring, like it depends on the size of the objects. But if you reduce everything by the force per area and deformation divided by the initial length of the object, then you actually are measuring the characteristics of the object. Then you'll be, it doesn't matter if the object is this size or much fatter. What you get at the end as a result is what's called the Young modulus, which is a characteristic of the material itself and not the material plus its geometry. Okay, so people usually do the experiments, and initially there's a very linear relationship, right, that you give the Young modulus, and then this curve looks very strange because that's going to tell where your material ceases to act as elastic and start acting as something else. Okay, so this is a way to characterize your objects. And then you can ask, okay, what does this have to do with biology and cells and tissues, right? It's because now recently there's a lot of people recognize that your cells act as material and act as complex material. So there have a new research being done on this area to actually make the same kind of measurements or infer the same kind of properties when you talk about cells and tissues. So this is a very nice work by Guillaume Charles from Francis Crick Institute in UK, where he basically are culturing an epithelial tissue, right? Placing, gluing them into forceps and then stretching it to measure those kind of stress relationships between those cells, okay? As you stretch them, okay? So is it linear? Is it super elastic, non-linear elastic? So how does it look like? So he has this kind of setup. Okay, so this is a paper that is still on bioRxiv. You're probably gonna go out in a very high impact journal. And they're basically, here you see the experiment, right? They're stretching the cell breaks apart, okay? And then here's another experiment. They have treated make the cells more stiff, right? So they do not break. Okay. So I have a little demo to actually explore that. It should be the force strain demo. Let me just close this one and open here. Okay, so I don't have much time to go through it, but if you just open that and click opening player, right? You should see a lot of graphs popping out like this, okay? I basically create a bunch of cells, have all the cells with links, and then I'm adding external force on those cells here to the right, and a force to the flank of cells on the left to the left, okay? And then I'm tracking what is the strain of the cells as time goes by, and what I'm doing, I'm increase the force over time, okay? And for each new force that I add to my cells, okay, I see how much stretch it is, and then I start to populate this, create a stress strain graph here on the right. So I let here the simulation play, and As soon as hit 1,000, I start tracking the cells, okay, the strain and the force, and then every 1,000 multiple step, I make a slight increase on the force, and then the tissue start to be stretched, okay. So here so you see that at this point I'm increasing the force, okay, then I increase the force again, the strain is going up, okay, and here I start to get a stress-strain relationship. Oh, let's see it here. So basically what I'm trying to do is trying to reproduce this experiment in CompuCell, okay. So here you see that it's kind of stretching, okay. Okay, let me automatically adjust the. So, okay, for this one in particular, it's kind of looking strange. So here's going to be the stress strain measurements. Okay. Okay. And here's the code going very quickly because we have 1 minute. I make it periodic on the Y. I make just one cell type. I have the excellent potential plugin. I have the neighbor tracker, the focal point prosthesis. So I add links between the cells. Okay. I make the initial condition. And here I create 2 plots once you have. And then every 1,000 multicolor steps in higher, I keep adding more and more force. I measure what the stress is, okay, and what the strain is, and make those plots. So basically, that is what is going on in this simulation, okay. And then you see that it's fairly linear, but now, unfortunately, in this model, you start to get some fingering on the cells on the edge, so it's not perfect, okay. But this is something simulation that you have here, and you can use to now test a few things. What if I make my links stronger? What happens if I make more links between the cells, or I have less links between the cells? For example, if I do here in the XML, I only allow, like, say, 3 junctions per cells. Okay, you can stop and play this again, and I should see that the cell be when I stretch, you should be able to start seeing breakage in your tissue. Okay. So sorry, I have to kind of rush through this one, but the model is there for you to play with if you want. Could add a force from the Z direction? Yes, I can, but then I have to make a 3-dimensional simulations, right? So if I make a 3-dimension, then I'll be able to do it. Right now, because 3D, I really can't. Okay. More questions? So if you guys don't have any, okay, you can unmute yourself and talk if you want. That's basically the end of this module. And actually, before I forget, and while you're still here, please fill up the module questionnaire. Tell me how good you went, okay? Please do it. So we can, and again, don't be shy about making criticism, okay? It was a horrible module, I waste my time. Feel free to say that, okay? We can take it, okay? But please feel free the module experience questionnaire. I have to launch. Okay, here is launch it. Please do this. And as soon as you're done with the module questionnaire, let's go back to the main Zoom link so we can resume our conversations there. Okay. So please fill the module questionnaire. We do take that seriously. We review that every day at the end of the day. Okay. And yeah, that is very important for us. Okay. So the problem here is that in simulation that eventually the links break, right? And when it breaks, you can see that is something happened here on the stress strain curve.
Hi, Julio.
Hello.
Sorry to interrupt. We are back in the main session, ready to go whenever you guys are finished up. I
Yes,
see
we
the
are.
I see the questionnaire is going, so just
Yes.
take like 3 or 4 more minutes and then we'll see you in the main room again.
Yeah, so please, as soon as you're done with the questionnaire, and I see that 3 of you are done, please go back to the main room, right? And again, I thank you all for being here and sticking to the very end. It has been a pleasure teaching to you guys. I hope that you find many of these things useful. Well, not everything will be useful to you, but at least our hope is that you now have a really good set of tools. Then, okay, there's all these tools that I can do with CompuCell, and you can choose, pick up and choose the ones that would work best for your hackathon or for every research you're doing. Okay.